Hey everyone, I'm here with Dan Gittler, who is a product manager in field service, specializing in connected field service, asset servicing, among other areas. And today we want to talk about a new feature that makes it easier to use customer assets on a work order and in other scenarios. So, hey Dan, can you tell us about this new feature?
Yeah, definitely. So this feature really serves a few different use cases. So I'm going to start with the problem here. So let's walk through the scenario where I have an asset that I'm the service provider, but my company is shifting to the servitization model, which means I'm offering products as a service. So I may own the assets internally. However, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to, as part of a contract, give this to another company to use, and I'm going to charge them in some kind of monthly or annual or based on usage fee. So the key point is that the asset is company owned, but currently I'm going to get work orders that are created for the customer who is currently in possession of this asset. So what would happen in today's world is I would go to create a work order, I'd click new work order, and I'd find my company, for example, that has the asset, and I'd jump down here and I would not see the water pump anywhere. Let's go about it a different path. Let's say that I didn't filter it, but I actually put the asset in first. And I chose my water pump because now I don't have a filter. And I said, all right, who's my account? And I tried to save this. So put in a couple of other fields here. And see if I'm missing anything else. One more. All right, and I'll click save. What you'll see here is that I'm going to get an error, which is by design until now, which basically says the customer asset has to be related to the service account of the current work order. So that basically means is if the account on the asset is not the same exact account as on the work order, I can't proceed with creating the work order. So why is it important to have flexibility in this area? As I started mentioning, if I own the asset, so I'm the account on the asset as a service provider, but then the company that's using it is calling in for work orders, well, right there I have a mismatch. So I would have had to do all sorts of workarounds to deal with that scenario. That's one example of why this is important. A couple of other scenarios that run into challenges is anything in the rental space. So same idea where let's say that I have tractors that I rent out, and let's use farming equipment. So I might have a tractor, I lease it out to a local farm, and again, maybe I own the asset. That's the same scenario. But what happens also is that there's almost this subleasing that goes on. So that other company who's leasing it from me might sublease it out to a local farm that's nearby. And so the point is I could have 2 or 3 different accounts that are calling in with service requests for that asset, but you can only have one account on the asset. And so that would have also been something that you're totally blocked on. And the last scenario just to talk through that was a problem over here is when it comes to the manufacturer scenario, which often has to do with warranties, but doesn't need to be. So we actually have a customer that manufactures water pumps, and they will sell to the consumer either direct, but they also go through the channel of distributors and installers. And so that pump gets basically purchased from them, installed somewhere. The manufacturer only has an asset record. That's what they have. They don't know at that point where that asset's located, who's the actual end user of that asset. And throughout the life cycle of that asset, they may get work orders that they get calls from, maybe it's the distributor, maybe it's the installer, maybe it's the actual end user that owns that asset at this point, but the manufacturer doesn't have that detail. So they would have had, maybe they don't even have an account listed on the asset, or maybe they have the distributor on it, but when the work order comes in, they need to be able to create these work orders for whichever account is calling about it, even if the asset is not pre-linked to that particular account. So that's the summary of where you would have been blocked from a scenario perspective today. So with that, I'm going to go in and show you what you can now do. I'm going to tab over to the field service settings, and I'm just going to say disable customer asset validation, and I'm going to say yes. Let's save the record, and let's jump back. So we're going to go through that same exact scenario we just went through. I'm going to click on new, and I'm going to find a datum who's the one calling me about the issue. I'll quickly fill in anything that's required. And as I come down to pick my asset, I still don't see the water pump because it's not associated to a datum. But what I can do now that I disabled that validation is I can change the view, and I can say just don't use the related to account view. just show me all my assets. And I can find my water pump. And now when I click on save, it's going to let me proceed even though the accounts are mismatched. And it just opens up a lot of potential scenarios like we talked about. We also went a step further. So going back to the last scenario we talked about, where the company, they don't know who that end user of the asset is. So imagine that the end consumer called and I'm trying to go through the process of creating a work order. I do probably want to update the account of the asset in that case as part of my work order process. So what we did also is we added another option which says suggest reparenting customer assets. Let's see how this works. We'll run through that same exact scenario. I'm going to click on new. I'll find my account. Quickly fill in everything required. And as I come down to my asset, once again, I'll change my view and I'll find all my assets, choose my water pump. And what you'll see as I select the water pump is this feature, which tells me that the account and the assets are not matched up. Do I want to update the assets account to a Datum Corporation? So if I'm on the phone with the end owner of that asset and they say, yeah, it's actually me that owns this asset. So instead of me now having to create the work order, go to the asset record, change who that owning account is, if I do want to permanently update the account for the asset, right here in line as part of the work order process, I can click on yes. And as I now go ahead and I open up this asset over here, we'll see that the account has been updated to a Datum. The last important point here is that the validation also, if you disable that validation, it also works for service agreements. So if you want to create agreement booking, if you want to create agreements and you want to have an asset that might not be matched with the account, if you disable this validation, then you can do that as well. The same exact scenario will work for work order incidents. So if I jump in over here to my incidents table and I click on new, and pick my incident type, that's fine. Incident relates to. So now it's just going to give me my assets for this customer. Now you see water pump, right? Because we reparented it, but let's just find something else that's not connected. So here we go. And same concept. It'll ask me if I do want to update the asset in this case. So most importantly, it lets it through. And that's really important for a scenario, right? If I'm a facilities manager and I have a bunch of assets that might be owned by different parties, right? So if the coffee machines are owned and leased out by one company, but I have the other equipment at the site that's owned by different accounts, but it's all at the same location, I can have a single work order. I can choose which location they're in, but each incident can actually have assets that are linked to different accounts. And then if you want the reparenting capability, it exists for work order incident as well.